All right. We're here with Steve Pierson, pastoring a church plant, doing a wonderful job. We'll hear more about that in the future. Down in Saratoga Springs, Utah. And we've been talking with him about how he got saved and how he got started serving in the church. Your pastor came to you and said, "We need a youth director. The kids know you, connect with you. Would you be our new youth pastor?" And that constituted your call. Did you hear any angels singing? Was there anything written in the skies?
The funny thing is youth ministry was the last thing on my mind ever. I mean, I was in apologetics ministry. I really saturated in a higher pursuit of learning and theology. And so, in an arrogant way, youth pastoring was kind of beneath me. It was something
All right.
I don't want to do that, But when he came to me and because what was happening is I was being asked to guest teach at some of the chapels at the school. And so what I was hearing from the students, because I had that background of just coming from the streets and kind of struggling with certain things. And so what I began to hear was, man, the kids love you. The kids love this idea. Well, good for them. God's called me here, So what ended up happening was God started moving on my heart to have a passion for the kids, but definitely not to pastor them. And so when this opened up, it was something that I just kind of felt, Lord, what are you doing? Why are you leading me this way? And so I did. And what I found out was that probably was the most profound and sweetest time of ministry, because it made me take this error of theological communication and bring it down to where junior hires and high schoolers could understand it, and so it was something that God absolutely ordained, because you start to think more highly of yourself than you ought as you gain knowledge. And so now God says, okay, can you teach a junior high and a high schooler this word and teach it to them where they can take it and apply it? And so that was the most amazing 5 years. But during that time, what I also started to realize is, I was in a church of 10,000 people. There was 20 pastors on paid staff. There was schools and everything. And it was almost a commune type thing, and
so the pastor started kind of inbreeding and folding in on one another rather than paying attention to the ministry outside.
Yeah. And I came from the outside, where you're on that edge of evangelism all the time, and you're sharing the gospel out of the construction field. You're laying hands on people on the job site. They're getting saved. And now I'm in this weird world where everybody's saved and there's Christian lingo. Hey, it's under the blood, brother. And all this other, and that edge was kind of gone. But with that edge also, there were some convictions that started to slip away, right? And when I was in construction, it was you bust your rear end and you work hard, and and now all of a sudden in the church, I started to become a little apathetic, a little lazy over time. We would have a ping pong table. We'd sometimes spend an hour playing ping pong with other pastors, getting paid, to minister while we're playing ping pong. And I remember that my wife was really stumbled by that. She's like, dude, they ain't paying you to play ping pong. I'm like, I'm a youth pastor. Don't worry about it. We play ping pong. No, they're paying you to work, And so I started realizing that, man, surrounded by a bunch of Christians, if we're all doing the same thing, it's okay, even if it's not okay. And so God was working on me in a different way in that environment. What was also happening is there were some things taking place where God was making some direction clear as to where we're going to end up. Right. We started, I started feeling, the best way to put it is, scripture says that when Elijah went to Ahab and he proclaimed a drought, God told him, I want you to go over to the brook Cherith, and I've commanded a raven to pray for you. And then one day it just says there in verse 6, I think it's in 1 Kings 17 or 18 in verse 6, it says, and the brook dried up. And God said, now I've commanded a widow. Right. And there was something happening. The brook was drying up. Yes. The sustenance there was drying up. It wasn't a bad thing, but I couldn't put it into words. And so combine that with, there was these things where people would come and say, you should start a church in Utah. You should. And I was like, and I started warming up to that idea. So when I brought it up to my wife, she was just like, I ain't moving. I ain't moving. So that was about 3 years before we moved. So I realized, okay, I need to start praying. She had her parents that lived around the corner. She had her best friends. I mean, it was the greatest setup. Well, what happened in that next 3 years is her parents moved away, so she didn't see them anymore.
Wow.
God started preparing her. And I remember the day she came up and she said, hey, if you ever feel like you want to move, I'm in. And so it was like, from the time that God called us, it was still another 3 years before he actually moved us. And so we ended up in 2005, we had a big mission trip of a bunch of youth across 5 or 6 states with semis. We did put a play together. And what I did is I planned it to go through Utah to spy out the land. So
wow. Wow. All right.
Through Utah, we rented a house while we came through, went up through Idaho, returned back, and we moved a week later. And we were up here.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was in 2005, and it was, we realized, okay, now we didn't come to start a church right away. We were considering it, but we hooked up with a brother that had just planted a church maybe a year and a half earlier.
Yeah.
And they wanted a young adults pastor because they lived in a community that had 70,000 college students. And so I was feeling called to that age group. And so I'm like, yeah, this is a match made in heaven. Became best friends. Our families hit it off. Our kids grew up together. It was fantastic. And so that was in the beginning of 2005. Well, what happened is a year after I'm here, we hook up with this parachurch organization that has ties at BYU with student dialogue. And so they were inviting students from Christian universities to come in with pastors and evangelical leaders and with Mormon professors and students. And we were having these dialogues for a week long. Okay. Well, this one time, it was Colorado Christian University was here, and we were having this dialogue, and the professor of the Mormon professor said, hey, I have a religion class at 5 p.m. Would you like to come? And we're like, yeah, let's go. So we walk into this auditorium, and there's all kinds of, stadium seating. There's all kinds of these Mormon students there. And he says, I got a surprise for you guys. I'm going to turn, we have a group from Colorado Christian. I'm going to turn the class over to you students, and you can ask each other questions. And so they're going back and forth and asking each other's questions. And one of the Mormon students asked the inevitable question, why don't you think we're Christians? And the Colorado Christian girl stands up and says, well, before this I didn't, but now I realize you guys probably are. So the Mormon professor looks at me and he says, no, Steve, you're a pastor in this area. You don't believe that, do you? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, why don't you share what you believe? I stand up, I face the auditorium, and it's the vision that I had had 3 years earlier.
Wow.
And I just sat there and said to myself, this is surreal. Mm-hmm. I am standing in a BYU religion class by invitation, answering the question why we don't think that they're Christians. Wow. It was an out-of-body experience. I'm like, God, you're so good. I couldn't have scripted this any better, but he had prepared me for that day to give him praise 3.5 years earlier when he gave me that vision about Utah, when I didn't even think I'm not going to Utah. So God was in it the whole time, and so we moved our family here, and it's been a blessing.
So Steve, what part would you say having a vision plays in not playing ping pong anymore?
What exactly do you mean by that? Give me.
Were you able to keep playing ping pong after God gave you a vision of need?
No.
when Isaiah was never called, he overheard God's heart in the context of what he knew and understood.
Yeah.
Who will go for us? Who can we send? Who will go for us? That's the heart of God. Isaiah was just in devotion time with God one day, and he overheard God's heart, and he said, oh, where God's heart and our ability combined, that's where we're called.
Yeah.
And after that, he didn't play ping pong anymore. He got to work. What would you say to pastors, to Christian workers who are tempted to play ping pong? And what would you say to people who are not in ministry who think that all that Christian workers do is play ping pong?
Yeah, I would say this. It was a lesson. It was something I was convicted about in California. But then when I ended up on staff at this church, it was revisited because what happened is it wasn't ping pong. Now it was foosball. And it was actually worse because the pastor there, with the youth pastor and myself and another, the worship leader, we were all on staff. We would spend 2 hours playing foosball at times. And my wife was very upset with that. And here's what I found is that just because somebody who's the leader says it's okay, doesn't mean that the leader says it's okay. And I realized that, God was even fashioning me in that, what I would see now is I am a leader, I am a pastor, and I am called to honor God with my time, right? Now, granted, to the people that think, well, pastors just play golf and they just sit around and they, there's nothing that's been more harder in my life than managing my time with all my responsibilities, because the need of the church is so great. People don't see the nights that are spent when people are in trouble and they want to see the pastor and his wife. They don't see, the things that you have to actually, the time you spend. I mean, it ain't a 40-hour, and since I've been in ministry for 26 years, it's not a 40-hour-a-week job, no matter how much you want it to be. It doesn't have to be a 90-hour-a-week job, but it certainly isn't 40. And so one of the things I think for those that aren't in ministries, I'd say pray for your pastor, because I can guarantee you every pastor has had at some time a struggle with balancing the time that they have between ministry and being a husband and being a father. It is the single most difficult thing to do. And frankly, we course correct all the time. There are times where the church will demand more time, and then the home is suffering, and we realize that, and we have to course correct, And so, that's a real valid issue.
When I got into ministry, one of the things my mother told me was, a preacher's desk is never clean. There's always more work to be done. What you were talking about, the work of the ministry is so demanding. There's so many people who need help. And especially as a young pastor, somebody just getting into ministry, I can fix everything. And so we go out there and try to fix everything. But to say a pastor's desk is never clean made it so that it was okay to leave that on my desk. And I will get to that tomorrow.
Yeah.
I have other things I have to do today. And our deal was, what does it profit if I gain a huge ministry and lose my own kids? I want my kids, I want my wife, I want my family to love Jesus. And if I fail there, I have failed.
But that's true, because isn't that what Jesus said? I mean, if the relationship between Christ if the relationship between a husband and a wife is indicative of the relationship between Christ and his church, Jesus says in the most intimate prayer to the Father in Scripture in John 17, of those you gave me, I've lost none.
Wow.
And I look at that and I think, wow, Lord, that's important. Of those you've given me, have I lost any? And I'm not, so I've grown a lot in that area. I've got a lot further to grow, but it's particularly with planting a church, it's even a greater stress because the servants are fewer, which means more of it lands on you. And so, I struggle.
You're planting a church. Yeah, you work though. You are learning that lesson well. You work. You are planting a church in an area that has 70,000 people.
Excess now. It's the fastest growing area in Utah. So plus 72, 73.
And to say there are two churches, Christian churches, is being extremely gracious. Yours is there's one church in that area that's doing
There's one other church. I think they got probably about 10 or 15 people. And then, they just started. And then there's another church that has about 50.
Well, okay. So we're just past Easter. You have an enormous online presence. You are able to do things that so many people could learn from because you work. And you guys run about 120 on a Sunday morning. Is that about right?
Yeah, we got about, we've shrunk a little bit. We can talk about that in another one if you want, but we've shrunk to probably realistically 80 to 85 adults on a Sunday and about 30 to 40 kids.
So it's about 120. Total. Yeah. Okay. We just passed Easter. You have an enormous online presence. How many people at least stopped by for your Easter Sunday morning service?
So we had 6,200 views and about 1,100 playthroughs, which means people that watched the whole thing. So
that is unbelievable.
Yeah, we're typically running since the COVID thing, and it's opened our eyes to something that we're going to continue for a while. But, since the COVID thing, we've had no less than 4,200 viewers on a Sunday morning.
Wow. Yeah, wow.
It's nuts.
And there's so much work to be done. And I'm really thankful that you're doing it. You're an example, Steve, of people who work, of ministers who work. So let's talk some more about some of those things in another episode. You good with that?
Yeah, totally.
All right. Thanks, man.